Good morning and welcome to Social Venture Partners and our series that we have been offering since the COVID-19 pandemic. Initially, we created this series to act as a response and a convening conversation for our community around the issues of COVID-19. We saw with that the great disparities that pandemic was hitting the marginalized communities, African American, people of color communities much harder than it was white communities. We then saw with recent events the need to create a conversation around race, and this one in particular is around systemic racism. Social Venture Partners is an organization made up of men and women who give their time, talent, and professional services to grow the capacity of organizations that are working on frontline systemic change in our community. We are proud that we have been in service to these organizations for over 20 years here in Dallas, and many of those organizations are in positions of strength because of the work, partially because of the work that Social Venture Partners has done for them and with them in our community. Social Venture Partners is a nonprofit itself, so we rely on the support of our generous partners and the support of the community. As you know, these kinds of sessions are not inexpensive to produce, but we wanted to keep them free for all participants in the community to be able to participate. So in that regard, we are very grateful to our presenting sponsor today, Ernst Young, who have provided the financial resources for us to produce this particular segment. We are grateful to Kevin Muscat, who is a social venture partner, as well as with the organization Ernst Young, who will come and present a few words on behalf of our presenting sponsor. Kevin.
Thanks, Tony. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this great panel session that Social Venture Partners has put together. My name is Kevin Muscat, and I'm a partner with Ernst Young. When I think of complex projects, discussions, and efforts that significantly touch the city of Dallas, I generally assume that SVP is right in the middle of it. Thanks to Tony Fleo, Emily Hargrove, and Sean Cahoe for allowing EY to be a part of this great event, and thank you, Dee Brown of EY, for all you do. It's an honor to meet Chief Hall, as well as District Attorney Crusoe, and great to see you again, Byron Sanders. Been a while since the SVP Philanthropy Party, where you saved me. Really quickly about Ernst Young. We are a professional service firm with roughly 300,000 employees across the world, with global revenues approaching $40 billion. We are aligned across 4 verticals, including assurance, tax, advisory, and M&A transactions and strategy, where I sit. My second job, and the one I am most passionate about, is my role for 6 years leading our EY Black Professional Network, one of various employee resource groups that are active in Dallas, utilized to ensure our members have a safe space and a support network outside of their traditional reporting hierarchies. We align ourselves across the pillars of community, recruiting, professional development, communication, and NABA, the National Association for Black Accountants. Another thing I'm proud of is EY's vocal and clear stance on anti-racism, which touches on words like systemic racism, discrimination, and injustice against the Black community. We know we have an amazing culture. We even got the top spot on Diversity Inc. recently, but we also know we have much more to do to drive further, faster, more sustainable change for our Black professionals and communities. We know it is easier to show up with passion after the recent weeks when people are fired up and motivated, but we also know this is a marathon, not a race, and we look forward to being involved on the entire journey until we get to a level playing field. Some things EY is focused on include evaluating internal talent and business processes to advance equity across race, investing in organizations to fight social injustice, heavier contributions to HBCUs, fully funding a new digital divide initiative to bridge the technology and overall learning gaps, focusing on creating and supporting the entrepreneurial ecosystem for minority small businesses, using our powerful platform to drive policy change, as well as lead actions for change in our cities, and investing in our communities through employee volunteer programs. Along the lines of this last point around the community, without a doubt, we would love a seat at the table to help effectuate positive change for this city with specific focus on any efforts related to the police department. These efforts we know are not new, but we also know they will be accelerated and under much more scrutiny going forward. We truly want to support the chief and her efforts. So how does EY help? We are a gigantic and expansive consulting firm, solving complex problems and performing projects for the biggest and best companies in the world. When I read about potential efforts around culture initiatives within DPD, I think of our amazing human resource consultants that do these projects for a living. These same consultants perform projects all the time related to compensation structures, dealing with unions, employee morale. In regard to new guidance that will come down from federal government and the state and city levels, I think of the importance of compliance, which is a stronghold for EY, based on our history being a trusted third party ensuring companies around the globe are compliant as it relates to their reporting and operations. When I think of analyzing complex data that comes in different formats from different systems and different agencies, I think of our amazing data analytics practice that is working with complex data all the time in an effort to ground it, make sense of it, and provide visual displays that tells the true story of the data. Sprinkle in some machine learning into the mix and you get some pretty amazing analysis. No more fake news or manipulation. The data is the data and it will tell the story. We have communication experts that help telling that story of historical results to the community to show progress made, improve statistics, improve results. Technology issues are at the top of mind with EY, and we'd like to help for any of these issues within the police department. We have a world-class IT advisory group with the best tools and resources available. Finally, we have helped companies implement innovation programs where employees and employers bring ideas to the table and can be rewarded for ideas that are implemented. In closing, if we weren't on a video call, I would look Chief Hall and DA Crusoe right in the eyes and tell them EY wants to help. We are offering our assistance on any or all of the projects and ideas mentioned above. We know many ideas are floating around, but in the end, these ideas have to be actionable, prioritized in order of importance and level of effort, communicated, executed on, tracked, and measured. EY would like to be a part of this journey. We also can introduce various of our corporate partners in the community who may also be able to help on these certain initiatives. Having companies like ours in the local community help on a pro bono basis is the least we can do to be a part of historic change and to continue to better the operations of the police department that we rely so heavily on and that plays such an important role in maintaining and bettering our society. EY is here to help, and we will anxiously await next steps. Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, Kevin. And I want to give a special shout out to all the EY employees that are watching today. Thank you for all the work that you are doing in the community and the work that you do for good. I would like to bring our panel on now, our Chief of Police, Renee Hall, our DA, John Crusoe, and Byron Sanders, who is the CEO and president of Big Thought and also a partner at Social Venture Partners. I invited Byron particularly today because when Byron was serving on the board at Social Venture Partners Dallas, he was very instrumental several years ago in helping us get more focused on working with organizations that work in the area of systemic change, understanding that we have a theory of change and a belief as a philanthropic organization that poverty is not actually the bottom line reason why there are so many social ills, but it is actually racism that causes poverty in so many instances. And so having open conversations, having actions that solve those problems are really critical to the mission of Social Venture Partners. Byron, I'd like to throw the first question to you, if I may. You wrote recently that you lead an organization that is dedicated to working with children of color. You have employees of color. You've moved your board to a more inclusive board, and you are a man of color and the CEO of an organization. And you talked about even with all of that, it is still so difficult within organizations to focus on systemic change. Would you share a little bit about what your perspective is on how systems actually do get changed?
Thank you, Tony. Genuinely appreciate the opportunity to share here. And again, really glad to be on in this conversation with Judge Crusoe and then Chief Hall. The challenge that I think we all have to acknowledge is that in order for us to move to the kind of impact that we're wanting to see in society, we have to acknowledge that the only reason that many of our organizations exist, specifically in the nonprofit space, is because of systems of systemic racism. If we have the primary beneficiaries of our work, if they are majority communities of color, if they are especially majority communities that are in concentrated poverty, then we have to acknowledge that we can't just try to focus our efforts on the fruit, which is what we talked about, some of the poverty that you see, but on the root. There's a reason why in every city, Dallas, San Antonio, Seattle, Baltimore, there's a reason why in every single one of these cities, if you go to the places that are the lowest income, that are the most disinvested, that have the highest crime reported, that have the lowest positive health outcomes, there's a reason why they're predominantly communities of color. And what we have to acknowledge is that racism doesn't exist interpersonally only. It's not just about using the N-word. It's not just about acts of racism against one singular individual. It's these systems and structures that have been created through redlining, through a disproportionate use of the GI Bill after the World War II, which was the primary way that wealth was created in this 20th and 21st century world. If we acknowledge that racism was at the root and was a actual part of federal, state, and municipal policy that created it, then we can acknowledge that our efforts to fix it have to also look at systems itself. And what we need to recognize is that you can't go and create a program to fix a system that was built with a racist or systemic and structural racist foundation without acknowledging how that exists and shows up in your own organization itself. And so what we had to do with that recognition is understand that we needed to bring in some help. So one of the most important things for an organization that's trying to become an anti-racist organization, it's not just good enough to be a non-racist organization. We have to be an anti-racist. It's to bring in racial equity consulting. It's to actually make an investment in resources. And that training is going to be hard because you have a range of different people who are part of your organization who are starting at different parts on the spectrum of understanding the degree to which race shows up in our world every day. And as we go through that training, we start to be confronted with questions that you didn't even know to ask, questions about your hiring practices, questions about your compensation structure, questions about simple days that you recognize and celebrate versus what you don't. There's a movement to celebrate Juneteenth right now. And that's not just because it's for Black people, it's because it's the actual day that we're starting to recognize most people in this country were, at least on paper, actually free. We celebrate July 4th as Independence Day. Now we're celebrating Juneteenth. But bringing in that training is critical, and it is a long process, and it's very difficult to do. The second thing that you would have to do, and that we're in the process of right now, we've been going through this for a year and a half, is creating internal structures of accountability that involve not just leadership at the top, but involves all levels of the organization, including those who are front lines, including middle management, and including people who are not Black or Hispanic or Asian. It has to be white people involved as well. And so when we create those systems of accountability, we're creating our own racial equity council. That's the thing that allows us to start to implement all those things that we would have learned in the initial racial equity training and consulting. The last thing I will say is this has to go all the way up to the board of an organization, whether it's a corporate board or a nonprofit board. Leadership all the way at the top has to be part of this commitment.
Thank you, Byron. The words systemic racism, and structural change and all of those kinds of things, are very in vogue at the moment. Lots of people are using them, but I fear that few people really understand what they mean, right? And so if you contrast the one bad apple thing in a group and you say, if we just get rid of the one bad apple, everything will be fine. And the reality is that the systems themselves are the issue. So for instance, it's not that there's one bad apple in a bushel of apples, it's that the basket itself is not right and needs repaired, right? And so Chief Hall, I'm going to throw this question to you. The changes that folks are looking for in the community, and your role in helping to bring about those changes. These changes are very hard. System changes are very, very hard. Even when you're at the top of the system, as Byron pointed out, there is a lot that has to go in to take place to do it. The reforms that you want to make immediately, are they consistent with the reforms the community members are asking for? Talk about which ones you think you have the power to implement right now.
So thank you for that question, and thank you for having me here today. Everything that the Dallas Police Department has incorporated into our general orders and policy since 2017 has been with the input of the community. Currently, we have advisory boards, chief advisory boards, stakeholder meetings, and these are things that the community has asked for. When we talk about the structure of the Dallas Police Department and what needs to be changed, we're talking about systems of accountability within our system, oversight boards, as well as body-worn camera and data relative to who we are interacting with, when, why, and all of those things. And so since the beginning, September 2017, meeting with multiple groups throughout the city, they've been asking for those accountability pieces. One being an early warning system, a system that actually delivers information relative to our officers and their daily behavior. Being able to alert supervision when an officer has been involved in multiple incidents within a month, say 3 incidents within a month. May not all be use of force, could be a car accident, could be late to court, but these are things that alert a supervisor to say something's going on with this officer, we may need to intervene, and give the supervisor, the department as a whole, an opportunity to identify any challenges that may exist and put the right resources in place. So if this is an officer that is challenged at this time or that may not need to be a part of our organization, that we have an early opportunity to intervene and make sure that we do not cause harm to the organization and most of all to our public. A lot of the changes that have been put in place, I think we should talk about the things that have been done. We have groups like Mothers Against Police Brutality who have come very early on and asked for general order changes that are right within my purview and autonomy to do, and saying, you test individuals for alcohol and or drugs when they're in a car accident. Why don't you do it when someone's in a officer-involved shooting or critical incident? So now, simple ask, easy. We put that into our general orders that officers will be drug tested and or alcohol tested when they're in a critical incident. So the changes that we're looking to move forward is the early warning system. We didn't start this early warning system that we have moving forward is a more robust one. The one we have in place is an IA Pro system that gives us general information. We're looking to move that information from a technology standpoint. We should be in an era in the police department where these are automatic alerts and we're no longer doing them manually. Currently, we're doing them manually. So pushing that to the forefront is just giving us a better opportunity to be prepared and work in front of the organization and not behind. So I would say yes, everything that we do is in line with our community. The reason we have community input is because we want to hear from the community. The reason the oversight board was so very important for us is because we know 21st century policing calls for, in order to build trust and legitimacy, there needs to be policy and oversight. So an oversight board with our community present, looking into what we do alongside of us and giving us input on what we need to change is the only way that we become legitimate in the eyes of the community and that we can move these relationships and partnerships forward. So we are definitely in line with the community, and we want to make sure that everything we move forward, even as it relates to our use of force policies, we have reviewed them and they are in line with 21st century policing, but are they in line with other requests for our community? And we're looking at that. And as we move forward, those things will be incorporated from our community perspective.
Thank you, Chief Hall. You know, one of the things that I want to keep this conversation focused on is the systems that are at play that keep the institutional racism and keep these kinds of unconscious biases locked into a system. Judge Creuzot, I think back to your campaign when you ran, and you ran on a very clear platform of some criminal justice reforms. They were practical, quick solutions. They weren't anything crazy. And you ran on that campaign. You got elected with an overwhelming majority. And then when you started to implement those changes, you started to get a backlash from the highest levels of government to the editorials in the Dallas Morning News from citizens. This work of doing systems change is extraordinarily hard. What advice would you give to folks who are entering it for the first time? What do you need from a community to continue to do these kinds of criminal justice reform efforts?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and good morning to everyone. I think, for myself, going back that I've practiced law for 38 years, and I have seen what the criminal justice system looked like in 1982 and my participation in it up until 2020. And across those years, I practiced law, but I also became a student of research and better practices and how other states implemented justice, and including criminal justice reform. As most people know, back in 1998, I began a drug court program, which had amazing results. And instead of putting people in jail and prison for possession offenses, and we're talking cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, harder drugs, we reduced recidivism by 68%. And we saved a lot of money, avoided money to taxpayers. So we had a foundation and that we knew could work. And then we looked at the data and saw who was being arrested, and we looked at the workings of the criminal justice system and to see where things were working and not working. And so really my platform was based on practice and research and a vision for the future. The vision for the future had a lot to do with reducing recidivism. It had a lot to do with reducing costs, but it also had a lot to do with reducing the disparate impact of police practices, not just in the city of Dallas, but the county of Dallas, across this state and across this nation. The things that I saw here in Dallas were things quite honestly systemic across the nation and had been in practice in Dallas for a number of years. And our own internal research showed that to be true. So I think the surprise as I saw it, and I think the chief was there with me, and we were standing together in front of the Public Safety Committee. As I told them, it's nothing new as to what I said and what I did. I think the shock to everyone was that as an elected public official, I actually did what I said I was going to do. And that was when we actually implemented the reforms and said, we're going to do this on a go-forward basis. That's what got the negative response. I think that a lot of that negative response was emotional and visceral. I think that it had nothing to do with the facts of how criminal law is practiced and how it's implemented and how it can be unfair and unjust and costly and ineffective. And so, but it shocked the system. And when I say the system, I mean from newspapers to city council members to mayors to police officers and what have you, that we actually were going to do these things. We have maintained our posture because we felt then, and the data has shown that we're doing the right thing, that we're being effective. Not all of the plans and changes have been implemented. It takes stakeholders to participate. We're working on that. You know, if I had to give myself a grade as far as doing everything that I said, it'd probably be a B, maybe a B minus, but we're working on it. We're working on a better grade. But we remain steadfast, and we continue to have community support. We continue to have ministerial support. We have the support of our election allies. And so we're going to stay the course and continue to implement the reforms and continue to look for other areas that we can do better in.
Thank you, Judge. Byron, is there any response to anything that you've heard that you'd like to bring up or mention or ask about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we were going through our strategic plan at Big Thought, we have a program, one of the things that we do called Creative Solutions. And that's where we're working with young people who've been in the juvenile justice system. It's a trauma-informed model that's had some powerful results. One of the lowest recidivism rates. Usually you're looking at 38, 42%. Ours is, our last year's data was 4%. So the stuff works, and the young people love being a part of it. But one of the things that we were confronted with when we were going through that process and talking with our young people, one of our alums said, "Why did I have to go to jail before I got something that could change my life?" And that hit hard. That cut deep. And what I think it does is it actually implicates a broader conversation in society. There's a movement going on right now outside these windows. I live right across from the police department. I know Chief Hall is in the thick of it, judges as well. There's the call to defund police. And I think it's an intentionally blunt statement, right? That's desired, it's intended to get a reaction. But what I hear at the root of it is we're calling for a new kind of investment in human beings' lives. I know Chief Hall has said it, and Chief Brown before. We ask police to do too much. We ask police to be a youth development counselor. We ask them to be a homeless caseworker. We ask them to be a mental health expert. We ask them to do too much. We ask police to deal with every single societal failure that we have created over the years. And to the point that you brought up, Tony, you said policing, you said systems are designed to do what they do. And since we have the same issues that's endemic throughout the entire country, I think we have to have a bolder conversation about what does public safety actually mean? How are we reimagining what investments we're making before we ever ask an armed person to show up and fix the problem for us? And so one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, in a country where the sixth leading cause of death for a Black man is death by police violence. That's 2.5 times higher than white men. And that's countrywide. University of Michigan, Rutgers, they did that study. We have to ask ourselves, what is it about what we have asked police to do and be that has created that scenario? And I think what we have to do as a collective society is talk about what are the investments that we can make that actually do make public safety the priority, but does so before something goes wrong. Just like our young brother was asking us, why did I have to go to jail before I got something that would change my life? And so the thing that I love, and I hope Chief Hall can talk a little bit more about this, that we're doing here in Dallas, a great example of is the right care system. It's that partnership between Parkland, Dallas Police Department, and the fire department, where instead of only sending out a police officer, we're sending out mental health support. We're sending out a mental health specialist. And that's been focused on Southern Dallas. And what we saw was a 30% reduction in ER visits for people who had access to that program. But it's been just a program. It's not the system. So the question is, how can we make different investments for things that actually get to the root of the problem, rather than having to send out someone who is armed and who has not been trained and has not even had the proclivity to work to deal with this particular incident that we're asking, the wide variety of incidents that we've been asking police to deal with. The more interactions that you have with police officers, the more likely you have the opportunity for something bad to happen. And if we don't want that to be the case, make the investments in the places so that we're eradicating systemic and racial inequities, deconcentrating poverty, and creating real opportunities for people to not have to live a life that would cause unnecessary interactions with law enforcement. I think we have to just have a completely different vision for what public safety is supposed to be.
I appreciate that, Byron. Chief Hall, I'm going to piggyback on what Byron is saying. And you know, when we talk about systems, we will often hear the comment that our systems are broken, when in fact, our systems are working exactly as they were intended to work, to disenfranchise some people to the benefit of others. And often in these kinds of systems issues, the people that are benefiting the most are outside of the system. So you are the head of a system. You are head of a very powerful system. You understand more than anybody else about the internal code. There are external laws that govern systems, and then there are internal codes that people do not violate. The things that make the system operate and keep everybody in check and in line and doing what the system wants you to do. Those things are so hard to change. What kind of support do you need to change those kinds of things, the internal, unconscious things that happen within your system?
So one, I would challenge that these systems are in place without the ability to do anything about them. We recognize where policing comes from. We recognize that policing in its entirety grew out of slave patrols, and that culture of oppression of Black and brown people was where we began. We also go back to Jim Crow and recognize there was more oppression. But I would challenge you to say that there have been many changes, even by myself in this role in almost 3 years, that have gone to eliminate some of the cultural things that exist within an agency. Are they all gone? I would say no. And I would say that that is a continuous process. One of the things that I've recommended for the agency back when I did the violent crime plan, because I knew that as we go out into these areas, and Byron, thank you for raising that our system is built to fight crime and create safety. But our crime fighting is right in the heart of the poorest areas in the city, because that's where the crime is. Individuals are in low income housing, no jobs. And I would even challenge you to say that a year ago when I stated these same facts, that these are the things that raise crime in the city, people were angry that a police chief would say that these poverty and education and training play right into crime. But today, if I have that conversation, we're all willing to listen. So I would say that there are progressive police chiefs like myself who are throwing out cultural assessments and identifying the socioeconomics that challenge us as an agency. We do everything within our agency to make sure that we weed out those bad apples that exist. We have disciplinary process. We terminate officers who violate law and general orders, and we ensure that the behavior is not acceptable in our organizations. Are there systems set up to bring those officers back into our agency? Absolutely. Are there even systems set up that sometimes defend those? But we fight against those. When you see oftentimes, whether it's my city, San Antonio, Baltimore, sometimes we're not in line with our associations. That means that we're not on the same page about where we need to go as an organization, but we have to work to get there. I do believe that there's a lot of work to be done. I just want to highlight some of the things that, even right here in Dallas, that we do. We work with Big Thought. We're meeting on a monthly basis to figure out how we're going to engage our youth over the summer. Last year, my organization, myself, along with Target, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Workforce Solutions, we all came together to employ kids who live in some of our higher impoverished areas, as well as those individuals who had the highest incarceration and victimization rates throughout the city. We brought them into the police department. They worked in our substations, in our IT department, in City Hall, and in other philanthropic areas across the country, across the city. So we could build those partnerships and create that, or create an atmosphere of comfort and not fear with our Black and brown youth, to ensure that we are doing away with the historic partnership or relationship between our police department and our youth. So there are some great things that we are doing. I would say even as a intentional effort to make this police department reflective of our community, there has been an intentional push toward hiring more Latino or Hispanic officers. We've gone from 20% in 2015 to 24% currently, and our command staff has gone from 20% in 2015 to we have 33% command officers that are Latino or Hispanic, and a continuous push for the African American representation. So it takes all of those things to ensure that we're building these partnerships and tearing down some of the stereotypes that have existed in the culture of policing. Are we finished? Absolutely not. We have lots of work to do. We need you guys to partner with us, to help us, to bring us to 21st century policing as it relates to technology and how we interface with our public, to make sure that when something happens, we have the technology to push that information out to the community so that we're more transparent. So there's things that we can do, but I would challenge you to say that, saying that nothing has been done or the culture has stayed the exact same, that is not true.
Thank you so much for that. And we do recognize that systems change is very slow and it's painstaking, and many, many wonderful efforts have been made along the way to do this work. But where our community gets a bit disenfranchised is that people don't understand how difficult it is to make these kinds of systemic changes. And we fail to recognize the work that has gone in to get us to particular points and to move us forward. Judge Creuzot, you have started an entryway into some of these criminal justice reforms, but frankly, there is so much more to be done. And that is not to take away from anything that you have already accomplished or that our departments or our city has accomplished, but it is to say, how do you get the impetus? Where do you get the support? You know, it's not every day that you get this kind of upswell of the public to say, do this. And we all know, unfortunately, that that will dissipate. How do we keep that momentum moving forward so that people in your position and in the chief's position feel that they have the support of the community to make these changes?
Well, let's talk about some numbers, and let's talk about what happens on the street, not only in the city of Dallas, but these numbers are reflective across our Dallas County community and generally across the state. Let's talk about over-policing. It is my opinion that in this community, our Dallas County community, we have two different systems of police enforcement, one for people of color and one for everyone else. And if we go to the lower level offenses, that is things like criminal trespass, but more importantly, marijuana, which is becoming recognized as a medicine or just outright legal across the United States. We have disparate enforcement of marijuana laws in the city of Dallas and in Dallas County. And it's a lot of people's responsibility, not just the police chiefs of our cities. It also goes to our city councils and our mayors and our city managers. And for example, last year in 2019, when I said I was going to reject first-time marijuana, misdemeanor marijuana offenders, we rejected about 1,500 cases. Okay, so far this year in 2020, in the city of Dallas, we've rejected 1,600 cases. So the enforcement of these cases is going up. Let me tell you, the most common scenario is a traffic stop. It's a traffic stop for no front license plate. It's a traffic stop for no turn signal, etc. I've even seen a case where a traffic stop was initiated because the person didn't put their signal on more than 100 feet before they made the turn. Those type of enforcements are in African-American areas only. We do not see that, or very little, in Anglo communities. That's a two-tier system of enforcement. And that is why one of the reasons why I am not prosecuting first-time marijuana offenders. There is a big push in this town with some people to jail the mentally ill and the homeless. We have looked back at that and seen that people get jailed over and over. We have people who have spent up to 1,500 days in jail. They get no services, they get nothing, and the police are used. So what type of economic impact do these policies have? Not just the moral impact of having two different policing systems, but let's talk about the economic impact. We calculate that by rejecting these marijuana cases, all the ones that we have saved the city of Dallas hundreds of thousands of dollars because they don't have to test this substance, which would be required to go to court. Okay? We have a project to have the mentally ill, instead of the police arresting them and taking them to jail, we have a project that we would like to get the city engaged in with funding that would put these people in an environment where they would get treatment, they would get medication, they would get medical attention, they get management, social work, and a pathway to being off the streets and in the homes. Will it be 100% successful? Of course not. We need about $1.5 million. Just by not requiring the city to test marijuana, we've saved the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet when it comes to discussing the needs for funding for this mentally ill, I get absolutely no response. You know, there's a place outside of the chief of police to talk about these issues. It's the Public Safety Committee. It's Adam Magoo. When you try to talk to him about these things, you get no response. There's nothing on the agenda for these things. There's a place for the city council to get engaged in these issues. There's a place for the city council to get engaged in the issue of arrest and how to handle marijuana cases. The fact of the matter is that the African-American community and people of color are engaged more by the Dallas police. They are engaged more. That and they know that, we know that. That develops what? An emotion called resentment. And when you have that, you have distrust and mistrust of very fine people who are our police officers, our commanders, and our chiefs. But the city has a role to engage itself in this, and it's not all on the shoulders of our police chief. This is a community issue. It's a community problem. It's a city issue. It's a county issue. And I'm waiting for the day when the city council itself becomes directly engaged in asking these questions and supporting the community, all of the community, in breaking down this two-tiered system we have of law enforcement in this town. So if that's my ask is of the city council. My ask is of Adam Magoo to stop remaining silent, to let's engage, set it on your agenda. Let's get some people there. Let's talk about this. Let's deal with these numbers, and let's support real systemic change in the city of Dallas, and make this a community where we trust one another, and communities don't feel, and rightfully so, over-policed, over-jailed, over-prosecuted.
Myron, I'm going to throw it to you. Any comments on anything that the chief or the DA has said?
Yes, to that point, what Judge is saying is we can't have a world that's been created where you take resources away from an entire people. And the remedy for that, instead of putting resources back into a community, is you criminalize their way of life. You criminalize the opportunities that exist around them. And that's really what we have, which is why what Crusoe is saying is the case. You have more enforcement of laws in areas of disinvestment. And what I think we have to be honest about is the reality that it's not, we have the police department, we have the law enforcement, we have the prosecution that we, the community, call for. We have the system that we deserve. And if we want to have a fundamental change in what these outcomes can be, then we have to acknowledge that that's what we have to call that's what we have to call for from our council. We have a budget coming up. And as we're building the budget for this upcoming fiscal year for the city, this is the time where we can be bold. The streets are calling for it, data is calling for it, and the police themselves have said, yo, this is not exactly what we're supposed to be doing. They're saying it themselves. We should listen to every single one of those voices and call for a significant investment in community resources that provide real opportunity, because the fact of the matter remains that we are not going to get to be a better society. We're not going to get to be a more equitable society as long as we have this disproportionate and disparate criminalization of an entire way of life for Black and brown people throughout not just Dallas, but throughout our entire country. Now is the moment, now's the time. This is, I think, the second civil rights movement, the second wave of the civil rights movement, for us to dramatically recalibrate what we're asking for out of public safety and make the investments where we know the investments belong. The one last thing I'll say on this, Tony, is this. What if we did an analysis on 911 dispatch calls? What if we did an analysis to see just how often we're asking an armed person to show up to answer a question and then ask the question, is this the thing that we need to be sending somebody out with a gun and a person whose lens is to enforce law enforcement to show up and answer? And if we go back and do that 5-year analysis of 911 dispatch, we can get a good picture of where we are in the city of Dallas, and actually what are some of the other things that we need to be shifting resources toward in that sense. Involve the community, make sure their voices are involved with this process, but I would love for EY or someone to take up that cause where community voices are right there alongside our police department, and we're evaluating and looking at how are we actually using resources, and are these the best things for us to do? Let's address the problems and not criminalize an entire people's way of life.
Thank you, Byron. I appreciate those remarks, and it's a great project for our sponsors, Ernst Young, to get involved with. It sounds like a good plan. Chief Hall, I want to keep the conversation centered around systemic change and organizational change, culture change. There are some, systemic change gurus who will say bad systems beat great people every time. And I want to go on record as saying that my personal belief is that the vast majority of people that are serving our city as public servants are really good people with the right intentions. But when they have systems that don't necessarily support that kind of doing what is right all the time, it becomes a little bit more complicated to do. And so I just want to ask you, what, if anything, if you had your wish list, if you had something that, would say, hey, if we only could do this as a community, this would go such a long way in making sure that the best of the best shine in our community and in law enforcement, what would that thing be, do you think?
I think what we have to focus on is, when we talk about what does the police department want or what does the community want? Because I think those are two separate things. As a police chief, I'm the police chief of not just the police officers, but the entire city of Dallas. So there are multiple aspects of that. And so I have to answer the question in multiple aspects. And I'll say from the police department, we want to have the resources, the manpower to be able to address the crime and the safety elements of the city of Dallas, and to be solely focused on those things. That's what our desire is. If we talk about from the city's perspective, is that the city would have the individual responsibility of making sure that people have what they need in order to function in society. The challenge here is when systems are broken, it requires our officers to show up. And I think Byron said it, and the DA has said it, is that we show up in a position to enforce a law that the law is created for a wrongdoing. So if marijuana is illegal, the police department showing up and doing nothing is not a response to the majority of the community, because our calls for service are coming in and saying individuals are standing on the corner selling marijuana. We want them to go. Can't walk my kids to the store. There's marijuana smoke all over the place. And so if that is a systemic issue within the Black and brown community, then society or the system has to address those concerns. Because when my officers show up, the challenge for me saying, I need you to look past the marijuana issue is now we're freelancing. If we look past marijuana, are we going to look past cocaine? Are we going to look past prostitution? So the system has to be built so that our response in the Dallas Police Department is congruent with what the society, the city has said that is unacceptable in our area. We are followers and enforcers of the law. So the question is, what is the law? Is the law systemically and structurally and strategically racist? Does it impact the community? And so I would just say that is not my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse is the police department. And so as long as we are governed by making sure that we're protectors of the law, I just need to make sure that the structure for which we operate in has the right training, has the right resources, has the right systems, data, checking to see if we are disproportionately going after individuals of color, and if so, what can we do about it? But again, I will say over and over, we are challenged when the highest portions of our crime is in the Black and brown community. And then our enforcement has to go into the areas that are Black and brown, because my responsibility as a police chief is to keep this city safe. With high crime rates, I'm not doing my job. So I need to be able to balance the scales. And so that's where I sit from a chief's perspective, is we have to have a system that allows us to operate from the standpoint of an unbiased. And if the system itself is biased, then it creates an impossible opportunity for us to do our job.
I really appreciate that and think there is much truth in that. DA Crizel, I remember back many years ago when I was doing a bit of community organizing, and we came up with a plan and a strategy and presented it to an elected official. And he said, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is really fantastic. This is exactly what we need right now." And we all sighed and said, "Wow, we have a big victory here on this." And then he said, "Now go get the people who actually vote for me to tell me to do it." At every point, there is a strategy around organizing and who are the people that we need to hear from in order to make the changes. You are an elected official. What do you think that the citizens that vote for you need to do to hold you accountable, to help you get your agenda through? What do you want from the citizens who actually put you in office?
Well, first of all, thank you. Let me just speak a little more broadly. First of all, we need to stop talking in sound bites and clips and generalizations. We as elected public officials, the police chief is in a different situation than I am. She's an appointed official who's appointed by an appointed official who's appointed to elected officials. And that's why I go back on this all the way back to city council. Let me say something. This idea that the vast majority of people of color who are arrested for possession of marijuana are arrested on traffic stops, from what our data say. So it's not a call for service. It's a decision to pull somebody over. And they're pulled over for reasons that are not done in other communities. So we, in fact, have two different systems of policing. And there's no question about that. Our information data goes back to 2015 when we started collecting it. The same percentages of African American to Hispanic American or Hispanics to Anglos as far as marijuana filings are exactly the same when crime was low, and it's exactly the same when crime is high. So there's really no relationship between this enforcement of marijuana and these other low-level offenses to people of color and what the crime rate is, the violent crime rate. The fact of the matter is, if you arrest someone for marijuana, you're going to spend possibly up to 4 hours as a police officer booking that person into jail. Well, that's 4 hours that police officer does not have to spend on the street responding to violent offense calls. And so I just don't see the relationship between this type of enforcement, which is immoral, and the response to violent crime. I just don't see it. And that's why I think there needs to be an engagement with the city council and get their input and their engagement on this to assist the police chief. She and I have been before these committees together, and it's not always pleasant. And I think she will agree with that. But the only thing I can do is present the data and stay focused on these issues. And I think that's what any elected public official needs to do, is stop talking in platitudes and sound bites and clips and get down to the business of what is the data and what does it suggest at where we are and what can we do to improve the quality of our institutions and therefore the quality of life for the citizens of our communities.
We have just a few minutes left, and I would like for you to share with our rather large audience. You know, we had 1,300 people register for this session, so there is great interest in these conversations, and we appreciate your willingness to have them. I'd like to ask just each one of you, just in a minute, to reflect on how this recent time period with COVID and with the race relations issues, how have you been changed in the last few months and in the last few weeks? And Chief Hall, if you wouldn't mind responding to that, just very briefly, how have you been changed as a person by all of this?
I think how we've all been changed is COVID-19 allowed us to see that there are some things that are out of our control, but it has allowed us to figure out how to work smarter, to utilize technology, to care more for one another's personal, professional, and safety. I think that it has given us an opportunity within the police department to recognize that no matter what the challenge is in the country, we still have to show up. We still have to keep our city safe. We have to keep our community safe. And we need resources to be able to do that. And so it has taught us that what we always knew is that we are the front line, and that come what may, we are charged with making sure that order is maintained in our city, and that we have a responsibility to our community, even when things are, totally chaotic. What these protests have brought to us is a message of change. I think it has brought to the forefront the death of George Floyd was horrible, it's horrific, and no one should ever experience that at the hands of law enforcement. 800,000 of us who wear the uniform watched one of our own murder a man, and it put all of our positions in perspective and recognizing that something has to be done. And I think right now, everyone is in that same space, that dealing with a pandemic and what Byron described as a new civil rights movement is that change needs to happen. And we are in perfect position to make those things happen. We have everyone's ear. We have an opportunity to bring everybody to the table to design the kind of systems and structures that we need, deserve, and should have all across this country.
Thank you, Chief Hall. I want to thank you for your service to our city, and particularly for being willing to share in this conversation today. Thank you so much. Judge Griswold, just very briefly, how have you been changed?
Well, I'll tell you, COVID-19 has changed all of us. And I have to tell you, unfortunately, a couple of days ago, I may have been exposed to it. So I'm actually, unfortunately, in self-quarantine with my son at home right now. And it, of course, will be a few days before I can get a test to see where I am. But at this critical time, I need to be at work. I've been at work every day. And so it certainly changed that. But the incident in Minneapolis has the brazenness, the arrogance, and of course, the behavior of choking what appeared to be choking someone to death with a knee, and the smile and the grin and the knowing that you're on film says a lot about what certain people feel they can do and get away with against people of color and poor people. And it's not just people of color, it's also poor people of any color who are treated differently in the criminal justice system. And I think it has awakened us, it has awakened this country. There's a new energy, it's an energy that I welcome, but it's an energy that I'm gonna go back to this. Right here in Dallas, in the city of Dallas, I am a resident of the city of Dallas, and I want my city council to take these issues up. I want the chair of the Public Safety Committee to get up and let's start having hearings, and let's start developing what the facts are and give guidance to our public servants, and have the mayor and the city council speak up on these issues. And I think if we can get that dialogue started in those circles, that we will have taken the death of Mr. Floyd and done something good for the city of Dallas.
Thank you, Judge Grisette, and thank you for being with us today. Byron, I'm going to let you have the last few closing remarks.
Thank you, Tony. COVID-19 has, in almost a paradoxical way, I'm more hopeful now than I've ever been in my adult life, that we're going to be able to make leaps forward in this moment in time. And the reason why is because you said, I'm the president and CEO of Big Thought. I'm engaged in our community, but I'm a Black man. And so when I see things like what happened with George Floyd, when I see things like what happened with Tatiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, Botham Jean, I experienced that first as a Black man. And I think about my two Black babies that live in this house, my daughter and my son. I think about my wife. And I ask the question so often, what is it going to take for us to get unstuck? What is it going to take for us to move beyond, settling on the fact that we dismantled Jim Crow racism, but we let all of this systemic and structural racism continue? What is it going to take for us to get out of that? And for the first time since I've been paying attention, it feels like we're in a moment right now. It feels like we're in a moment where things like what In Defense of Black Lives is putting forward with their 10-point plan for public safety, where we're talking about different kinds of investments in our communities are realistic, where philanthropy, or organizations that you've never seen before, put out statements like Black Lives Matter. 3 weeks ago, Black Lives Matter was still a controversial thing, right? But here we are in a moment in time where, to Chief's and Judge's point, people are listening, but we have to take this openness and turn it into action. I'm more hopeful than ever before, but it's going to take a collective exercise of imagination and an endurance to ensure that we get this thing done, so it's not just a moment, this is a movement. I'm more hopeful than ever before. And I hate that lives had to be lost in order for us to wake up. But my God, if we're having this same conversation 50 years from now, then shame on all of us. So let's go.
Thank you, Byron. To our audience, there are 3 ways that systemic change happens. Systemic change happens when the person at the top of the organization decides that they're going to work intentionally and deliberately within their organization to make the kinds of changes necessary. It happens with people who are behind the scenes, writing policy and changing laws over months and years of time to get that done. It happens when people take to the streets and they protest. It happens when they hold public institutions accountable for the actions that they take. Systemic change happens quickest and most broadly when all 3 of those are working together at the same time. As Byron said, this is our moment in time. I invite every one of you in the audience to join us in figuring out solutions that are systemic and long-lasting. Once again, to my panel, thank you so much for giving us the time. I appreciate it, and I hope that we can enter this work for a new moment in time that brings about long-lasting systemic change. Thank you again to each of you, to our audience, to Ernst Young, and to all the employees that have done this, made this possible, to our social venture partners who do this work every single day, to Something Good Consulting, who has been with us for a number of events as a sponsor, and for Forward DFW for helping us get the word out. Appreciate all of you, and blessings for a great day.